Oh, hello and welcome everybody. I'm so excited to have folks here today in the lunchtime hour. Just letting people kind of cruise into the room and we'll get started right at about 12:01. So if you're hungry, grab a snack, or if you're thirsty, make sure you have some water. And we'll get started just about right on time.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started in about 1 minute. Oh, no. What? Oh. All right. Hey, everyone. Okay, I think in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started. Levi, can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes.
Okay, sorry. My Zoom is telling me it's connecting, but hopefully. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to our November webinar. My name is Megan Michio. I use she, her pronouns, and in training team 2 days a week. And
Oh, you're kind of cutting out, Megan. Or maybe you're frozen.
then I'm a school health professional 3 days a week. You plus. Oh no. Shoot. All right, let's try this. My computer just didn't want to cooperate. Okay, so sorry, let me try that again. So I am going to introduce our speaker today. Levi Erickson is the program manager of LGBTQ plus equity in Denver Public Schools and is a proud member of the Culture, Equity, and Leadership team. Levi has an eclectic background with over 14 years of experience in education, theater, and the nonprofit world. Regardless of role, his work has always been rooted in dismantling unjust systems and a strong drive towards equity and inclusion for all. A transgender, genderqueer leader and learner, Levi proudly serves the DPS community as an accomplice, hub, and expert in the LGBTQ plus field. Outside of work, Levi enjoys biking, yoga, cooking, and spending time with his family, and became a parent during the pandemic. So welcome, Levi, and thank you all for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. Pleasure as always. I appreciate you. Thanks everybody for taking time out of your day to come to this webinar. I love being able to expand knowledge and support folks in their learning. like Megan said, my name is Levi. My pronouns are he, him. I've been the program manager of LGBTQ plus equity here in DPS for about 2 years. I'm the first person to serve in this position. Before that, I was a Denver Public Schools teacher. I've been working with LGBTQ plus youth for about 14 years. And so I'm really excited to get to be here today. Before we kind of dive in, I just want to say, transgender and non-binary identity is nuanced and it's complex and it's highly individual. And so, today I'm going to talk really high level about ways to be supportive and give tips. And I hope that folks will ask questions when it's time. But just want to recognize that these experiences are highly individual and just incredibly nuanced. And so just to remember, as you're entering into a space of supporting transgender and non-binary youth, really to take it by case. And there really is not a one-stop solution for everything. So as we get going, maybe, yes. The first thing I want to do is just invite folks to be in a brave space. I know these conversations can sometimes feel intimidating or overwhelming or really new for people. And that can bring up like a really big range of emotions. And I want to invite everyone into the space, whether you have a lot of knowledge or a little knowledge or no knowledge, however you're coming into this space, I invite you here today. And I want you to know this is a soft space of accountability. So while I, of course, don't want anyone to come in and intentionally be homophobic or transphobic, there is space for learning, right? And we're all always learning, and we learn by failing forward, right? So please come into this space. I invite you in vulnerability and in community as we come into a space to learn together. So the first thing I want to do before we get started is just kind of do a grounding poem. So if you've done any professional developments with me, if you're a person working in DPS, you've probably seen this poem. I love it. I play it a lot. This is our grounding poem today, and it's a poem called Your Life by Andrea Gibson, who is a genderqueer, non-binary poet and activist, tours the world reading poetry and supporting others. And I just want to take a minute and just ground in this poem to think about, I feel like this poem really brings up a lot of the nuance and a lot of the complexity, and to think about what it means to have a hard life that is your life, and really connecting that to the young people that you're here to create more support for today. Before I play this poem, I want y'all to know there's one cuss word in it, and I also want to acknowledge that this poet came from a very, very religious upbringing and really grappled with that, and they're coming out. And this poem talks a little bit about that, but it's not meant to comment on anyone else's experience of faith and spirituality. So take a minute, take a deep breath. We're going to take a minute and all get grounded by listening to Your Life.
It isn't that you don't like boys. It's that you only like boys you want to be. David, with his jaw carved out of the side of a cliff. Malcolm, who doesn't have secrets, just stories he owes no one. Chris, the basketball hero with a tick, blinks 15 times when he makes a shot. You spend hours blinking in the mirror, pretending you're a star like him. Mary Levine calls you a dyke, and you don't have the language to tell her she's wrong and right. So you just show up to her house, promising to paint your fingernails red with what will gush from her busted face if she ever says it again. You're in the 7th grade. You don't even know you want a girlfriend. You still believe too much in the people who believe in Jesus to even feel that desire through its hell threat. You just want to kick your desk on the way to the principal's office, slouch in detention, want to cut your hair and spit out whatever you don't want in your mouth, your own name even, skirting around the truth. You don't yet know the boys are building their confidence on stolen land, but you do worry the girls might be occupied with things you will never understand, won't ever be good at. You take one pretty step and feel like you're pouring bubbles into your own bloodbath. You don't want a soft death. You want a hard life that is your life. Your life in the locker room that doesn't stop demanding you keep your eyes on the floor. Your life at the prom while you run home in a snowstorm, chucking your last pair of heels in a snowbank, realizing you are the only boy you ever wanted to tear your dress off for. Your life, the first Christmas you spend alone, the years you learn to build your family out of scratch. Your life when someone drags you from a restroom by the color of your coat. Your life every time airport security screams pink or blue, trying to figure out what machine setting to run you through, choosing your life and how that made you into someone who now often finds it easy to explain your gender by saying you are happiest on the road when you're not here or there, but in between, that yellow line running down the center of it all like a goddamn sunbeam. Your name is not a song you will sing under your breath. Your pronouns haven't even been invented yet. You're gonna shave your head and drive through Texas. You're gonna kill your own God so you can fall in love for the first time. They're gonna keep telling you your heartbeat is a pre-existing condition. They're gonna keep telling you you are a crime of nature, and you're gonna look at all your options and choose conviction, choose to carve your own heart out of the side of a cliff, choose to spend your whole life telling secrets you owe no one to everyone, till there isn't anyone who can insult you by calling you what you are, you holy blinking star, you highway streak of light, falling over and over for your hard life, your perfect life, your sweet and beautiful life.
So wherever you are out there, take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out. And I hope that you continue to hold the stories in this poem in your heart through our time together today, and also through your life. So I just want to secondly ground in some data. Your allyship really, really matters to young people. Your young people need you. Your allyship can make or break a young person, right? So no matter who else is supportive in their life, if you're a parent out there or a caregiver, your allyship really, really matters. I'm 41 years old. I have so much love in my life. I am an out trans person and super queer, but my family isn't super supportive, and that is still really hard for me. It still feels like a hole in my heart. And so I think that it's just really important that to just ground that the family and the caregivers are really out there supporting young people. And it's not to say that things haven't gotten better for transgender and non-binary youth. In some ways they have, but we have a really long way to go. And it reminds me a lot of kind of what's happening right now. It reminds me of that song that says, no, more money, more problems, right? So there is more visibility, and that's true. But with that visibility comes a price. And so I think it's just really important to acknowledge the struggles. This data is just a snippet of data from the Trevor Project National Survey on LGBTQ plus mental health. It was taken in early 2021. And so these are just some stats about kind of what's going on out there for LGBTQ plus youth. This, excuse me, this data wasn't disaggregated by gender identity, sexual orientation. So that's why you're seeing it as a whole. This is what I found to be most impactful: how many youth were negatively impacted by recent politics. This is a very divisive social and political climate for LGBTQ plus students, and especially transgender and non-binary youth. There's a lot going on in our world right now that tells transgender and non-binary kids that they do not belong, and it matters. It impacts them. 1 in 3 youth found their home to be affirming, in COVID and in being at home. It can be really, really hard to be a transgender, non-binary youth at home. And I think, talking about pronouns, having people respect your pronouns, which is a wonderful thing you can do. It's really important. But how much suicide, and I would say suicidal ideation, self-harm and destructive behaviors, right, goes down by a lot when we respect the pronouns and the names of our transgender and non-binary youth, right? And that really costs us nothing. So speaking of that, this is what I would establish as the bare minimum as you're working on your allyship. The first thing I think is really important is not debating people about whether or not transgender and non-binary people are valid. This is a difficult line to cross, right? Because some people have inquiries and they're curious and they're engaging and they're meant to find out more. And some people are just outright hateful, right? And so something that I don't do anymore in my work or in my life is I don't engage in debates about whether or not I'm valid. I don't engage in debates about whether or not I exist. And that's like the bare minimum that you can do is really work on that to say, you know, this may not be something I completely understand, but I validate that you exist, right? I'm sitting here right in front of you. That's how I know I exist. The bare minimum, couple of things. I have a toddler, so I'm always getting over a cold. I don't know if anyone else has that pain. Use the true name and correct pronouns of your young person. Person asks you to use they, them pronouns. They ask you to call them a certain name. Do it. You know, sometimes young people, they're kind of on a journey with gender, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. You know, sometimes the young person might try on he, she, they, them, Z. It's okay. Just roll with it, right? Young people are thinking about who they are and where they're going. And you can just follow that, right? And so there doesn't need to be a commentary if a kid is Ash one day and Fern the next and Jimmy the next. You can just kind of roll with that a little bit. Respect someone's identity, even when you don't totally understand, right? There's a lot of parts of people that we don't understand, right? Because we don't live in their lived experiences. It doesn't mean we can't have respect and empathy. Educate yourself and others when you can. So seek out resources, make sure those resources are reliable, research-backed resources that come from, you know, legitimate organizations. And when you have the space to educate others, you know, do it. And I think that, you know, sometimes engaging with, you know, a person who hates trans people on Facebook is not really the way to educate others. I would say that people like that are not really there to learn. But if you can talk to your second cousin about why transgender girls should be able to play sports on girls' teams, do that. So engage where you can, but have self-protective boundaries, right? Because there are things that are within our sphere of control, and there are things that are not. So if you're looking for the bare minimum, this is what I would say it is. Just a really high level, what is gender? I'm not going to go deeply into this. Again, this is a very nuanced topic. So you're going to get about 15 seconds, even though we could do like 7 webinars about gender. The first thing it isn't is reproductive sex or sexual orientation. So it isn't our genitals, it isn't our chromosomes, it isn't our hormones, and it isn't who we're attracted to. But gender is a social construct of what it means to be a man or a woman or a boy or a girl in a specific time or place. And so it is very historically dependent. It is very context dependent, right? We have to continue to break those norms that there are only boys and girls and that there are certain ways to be a boy or a girl. Gender is malleable. So gender can shift, gender can change. It can be fluid for some people more than others. You know, everyone has a gender identity and they're all susceptible to shifting in our lifetimes. And gender is how you see yourself, right? It's how you see your own gender. And so it's not always how people are interpreting you out in the world, but more about how you see yourself. These are just some really high level definitions. I don't know if anyone's ever been to a LGBTQ plus professional development. You get like 12 pages of definitions. I try not to do that, especially in the time we have now. So these are just kind of cornerstone definitions. You all can look at these in the recording. Sex and gender, which I just talked about. Cisgender, right? It refers to people whose gender identity aligns with their assigned sex. Cis, this side of, right? So you're a person, you're born with a vagina, you are labeled female at birth, and you identify as a woman, right? That is someone who is cisgender. Transgender, the opposite. It's an umbrella term for someone who doesn't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth based on their assigned birth sex. And that can mean a lot of different things. And so non-binary identities fall underneath a transgender umbrella, but not all non-binary people identify as transgender, and not all transgender people identify as non-binary, right? So transgender people can have a binary gender or a non-binary gender. Like I don't identify with binary gender at all. I identify as genderqueer, but I also identify as transgender. And so again, this is incredibly nuanced, and it can feel like there's a lot to learn. And then I just want to expand, excuse me, a little bit on what non-binary, genderqueer, and gender fluid are. People often have a lot of questions about what these words mean. And if you look at kind of the official definitions, sometimes the wording can look really similar, but I think people who identify as, I don't love saying identify as, I like to say who are non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, for them, that languaging can make a really, really big difference, right? So I identify as genderqueer, I don't identify as non-binary. I love this quote to kind of talk about genderqueer people, and specifically my own gender. Again, I can't speak to everyone's experience. I'm just kind of speaking up to my own. And I love this quote. I have it hanging above my desk in my office. And it says, in a way, I'm almost always passing as either male or female, because 99.9% of people don't see my gender. They don't have a concept for anything other than men and women. In this sense, passing means fitting into a binary gender system. I don't pass when people don't know what I am. Then they are actually seeing me more accurately. If someone were to ask me how I would describe my gender, this would be how I describe my gender, right? And so, you know, I think this is like, this is the way I describe my gender. My real authentic gender is not man, and it's not woman. And I think for non-binary people, people are often trying to say, well, you know, what are you? You are non-binary. You are neither male or female, parts male and female, or some other conception of gender that is just outside of a notion of what we see as gender today. And so again, like kind of non-binary, genderqueer, higher definition, high level, just kind of definitions are someone who experiences their gender as in between or outside of a binary gender system. And these are real and valid genders, right? They're not a phase. They are just as authentic as a gender as man or woman or male or female. And I think that it's really important to understand that like non-binary folks have different challenges maybe than someone who identifies as a transgender man or transgender woman, right? Spaces and facilities are not always built for non-binary people. And so, for example, I work in the Emily Griffith building, and there are single stall restrooms in this building, which are the ones I feel comfortable using, but there's not one on my floor. So every time I need to use the restroom, I have to go to a different floor to use a restroom, right? And when I have to use a restroom on my floor, I just use the men's restroom, but it's not how I would accurately describe my own gender. And a lot of things like that happen for non-binary people. You know, there's a lot of conversations about sports, transgender children participating in sports right now. But what's left out of that conversation is non-binary kids, right? And so if there's traditionally gender separated sports, how are non-binary kids supposed to participate? And to say, well, you could just choose where you feel more comfortable, you know, that's really dismissive of non-binary children's experiences. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about this. I see that my time is running a little bit short. These are just some Ally pro tips to, oops, sorry, I just kicked the desk behind me, to understanding gender. On one side are resources. I'm not going to go through all these resources, but these are all great resources to educate yourself about understanding gender. Actions, just continuing to educate yourself. Excuse me, knowing gender discovery is really a journey, and there's no right or wrong way to have a gender identity or be in transition. And so I think about that meme. I don't know if y'all have seen it like on Facebook or whatever, and it says, you know, this is what we think progress looks like. And it's, you know, straight arrow from A to B. And then it's like what it really looks like, and it's all squiggly and it goes somewhere. I think sometimes gender journeys are straight A to B, and sometimes they're not. And so I think sometimes there's this idea that, if a student comes out and says, I'm a transgender man, I'm a trans boy, and then they're in their discovery and then they're like, actually, I think I identify as non-binary or gender queer. That's not a gotcha moment. It's not a you're wrong moment. It's not a, oh, we shouldn't have supported this kid moment. It's a journey, and we're all in a space of discovery. And so, I think it's kind of like that quote, it's about the journey and not the destination. A lot of this is about the journey. Make sure to let your young person lead, right? So, there are butch girls, there are effeminate boys, and that does not make a child transgender. A child is transgender when they're transgender, but there are a lot of different ways to experience gender. And so sometimes I think in allyship, we really want to support, and the intention is in the right place. But sometimes what we assume is not actually what's happening. And so it's really important to be guiding and supportive, but to try not to jump to conclusions in any way. And to know that allyship is a lifelong journey, of course, right? Like I'm a white person, my journey in being anti-racist, it's not like I read a book and do this thing and now I'm anti-racist and my journey is over. So it's kind of the same thing with gender. The next thing I want to address are a few of many myths and misconceptions about transgender and non-binary people and topics. So as you can see in the parentheses, there are many myths and misconceptions. I really try not to give too much airtime to these because they cause so much harm to our community. But as you are growing in your allyship, it's good to know what people might say. So the first thing I hear often when I go into schools, especially elementary schools, is that children are too young to understand gender. To which I say, really? If you look at all of these pictures are about gender. They're about gender socialization, and they're about gender norms. We actually talk with kids about gender all the time. And it's arguable that preschool through 5th grade is a time when gender roles and gender socialization are the most strong. And so talking with students about expansive gender identities is expanding a conversation that already exists. It's not saying that it's wrong to be a cisgender boy or a cisgender girl, but that it is okay to be who you are and to explore other options. And so I think this is really, really interesting when people say, well, kids shouldn't talk about gender. Well, kids already talk about gender and they see gender. They have reinforced messages about gender, right? And so it is okay to talk to young people about gender, and I used to be a assistant at a preschool. I used to live in Boulder. I did this, I don't know, this is not a part of my bio. I don't know, like 20 years ago or something. And sometimes like a child who, was assigned male at birth would, run up to me on the playground and go, I'm a boy, and you never say to that child, I don't know, you're probably really too young to know that. We only say that to trans children. And so I think that is a really interesting contradiction. I think that's very interesting. We hear a lot about this being a trend or a phase or a new phenomenon. As a queer person who's always been a queer person, I think I can boldly say it is not. I've always known that there was something different about myself, but I did not have the language to describe it. I grew up in Oklahoma in the 80s. It was not a great place to be a queer kiddo. But this feeling of difference was just something that I carry inside my body. And I don't really have a way to describe it other than that. It just didn't have a language until I was older, until I was in my 30s. And so I think that, we provide space for children to explore and understand themselves. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden there's more trans and non-binary children. It just means there are spaces for them to come out when they're younger. Talking about this being a new phenomenon, trans people have always existed. Historically, trans people have always existed. If you look a lot at colonialism and kind of white supremacy and the need to normalize a gender binary, a lot of those stories and humans have been erased. But trans people have always existed. Non-binary people have always existed. And I think sometimes there's this sense that being trans or non-binary looks a certain way. And that can also be wrapped up in kind of whiteness and colonialism, because different folks have different access to be themselves. And that can look like it's documented in a lot of different ways. One book that I really like, it's called Histories of the Transgender Child. It's kind of a dense book, but it's a historiography of the medicalization and documentation of trans children. And honestly, I'm not that far into it because it's very, very dense and medical, but it's pretty interesting if you're into those kinds of reads. And then sometimes you might hear that this is a phase or it's a trendy new thing. And, you know, I think that ultimately you'll make the decision about what feels true to you. But just keeping in mind that nothing is objective, right? We can always all find data that tells us our point of view, right? So there's data that says the earth is flat. There's data that says we never went to the moon. There's data that says that the COVID vaccine injects you with a microchip. So there's all sorts of data. But some work is more biased than others. And so when people talk to you about it being a phase, they might bring up this study by this scholar named Lisa Littman. She's at Brown University. And she coined this term rapid onset gender dysphoria, which sounds like an official diagnosis or a medical diagnosis, and it is not. That study has been debunked. It is incredibly biased, but it's something that people who do not want to allow trans children to exist love to bring up. So happy to talk a little bit more about that. You can also just look up debunked Littman study. You know, like I said, I don't like to give these things too much airtime, but as you support a young person, you may fall into some pushback, and that's some of the things you might hear. And finally, here are just some ally tips to keep on trucking. I don't know if there's any other deadheads in the room. Excuse me. So supporting and demanding transgender and non-binary inclusion. Even if you are sitting in this room and you are not transgender or non-binary, and you don't have a transgender child or a non-binary child, you can still advocate for inclusion. And it's actually really important that you do, right? Sometimes there can be this sense that this work is for trans people, it's for LGBTQ plus people. It's not, it's for everybody. So if you want to see inclusion in your spaces, ask for it. It is really helpful. Reading gender diverse books with children. DPS's Sora collection has a huge collection of LGBTQ plus books. Again, seeking to change what you can, right? So talking to people when you can, but not when it feels fruitless. But you can advocate positively when you can't, right? So if you see someone being hateful somewhere, you can be positive and loving. You don't necessarily have to engage and get into that car crash, because, you know, you have to have emotional boundaries, and sometimes it's really just not worth it. Being a visible ally, right? So your kid's friend might need that too. And I said that last year, right? Our kids' friends, we don't know what's happening for them in their lives, but your house might be the space where they feel safe. This is a really important one, empower joy. So obviously the statistics and the data on transgender and non-binary youth, they're pretty gloomy, and that's true. But what's also real is that our transgender and non-binary youth don't need to be standing at the edge of a cliff for us to love them, to see them, to acknowledge them, to uplift them, and to recognize all of the awesome stuff they bring, right? It doesn't always have to be entering in this space of doom and gloom. And finally, speak up whether your young person is there or not. I would argue that it's actually really important even when they're not there, right? So like my family, I don't live with my family, and my family doesn't live here in Colorado. They sort of call me Levi, and they sort of use he, him when I'm around, but I know they don't when I'm not around. I know they don't. And so that's hard, right? That's really hard. I remember a few years ago, my mom posted this really offensive post about Caitlyn Jenner. And I said something to her about it, and she didn't see the problem, right? She's like, well, I love you. That's not the point. Work to be an ally all the time. Again, these are just some resources that I think are helpful. I definitely want to call out this Laverne Cox introduced Chase Strangio. He's the ACLU attorney specializing in transgender law on the Laverne Cox Show podcast. This came out, I feel like it came out like 2 weeks ago or something. It's a really, really good podcast. Obviously, there's a point of view, but it really outlines some of what's happening in terms of legal challenges right now, and kind of like this kind of, frankly, this anti-trans hate machine. And I think it's really powerful and very knowledgeable. It's about an hour long. And so, yeah, that's what I have to say. Here's some local resources. I'm going to link these. So if you all want, excuse me, access to them, Camp Indigo is an awesome camp for transgender, gender expansive, genderqueer kids. It's in Boulder in the summer. It's just a really great camp where kids can be themselves. Envision You is a organization here in the Denver Metro, and they work on substance abuse and prevention. Joy is Resistance is an amazing mental health support organization, and they have a lot of groups, and they work specifically with LGBTQ plus youth. The Center on Colfax, which is, of course, kind of the stalwart LGBTQ plus organization. They have a youth program, they have groups and things like that. Transgender Center of the Rockies has a lot of different resources and supports. The True Clinic, we're actually really, really lucky that here in the city of Denver, there is a clinic that supports transgender children, non-binary children. Not all cities have that, but we do. Ties is a really great organization run out of Boulder, but they do groups all over the state. And so that's a group that specifically supports young transgender and non-binary children, gender expansive children, and their families. And so there's social support groups, and I think there's like social events that they do, support groups for parents, and time for kiddos. Youth Scene is kind of a cool organization here in the Denver area, and they specialize in supporting BIPOC, LGBTQ plus youth. And so, BIPOC youth have unique needs that are sometimes not the needs of white children. And so it's great to know that there is a space that specifically supports that community. They also have a great list of resources on their website that I think it's like therapists of color, mental health supports of color here in the Denver metro area. So I think, yeah, what I see there are questions in the Q&A, but I think I'm supposed to let Megan ask them. Am I supposed to do that, Megan?
Hey.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see them, right? You said you can.
Yeah, I
see them.
can.
So if you want, I can either read them and you can answer, or I can read them. Do you want me to do that?
Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, go for it.
Cool. Okay, so one question came up, that one line in the poem resonated with me, that my pronouns haven't been invented yet. Why not? Why they? If a person identifies as they, I do my best to always use that pronoun. But I'm 50-year-old white hetero male who sometimes slips, and then I feel criticized for using my words the way I was raised. I admit I struggle with calling a single person by a plural pronoun.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think that the spirit of the poem line is to say that gender is evolving, and so pronouns to describe gender are also evolving. I think it's okay to make mistakes, and so I encourage you to take it easy on yourself. If you make a mistake and you use the wrong pronoun, just correct yourself and move on. Something else that I do is I'll practice, like when I'm driving. I have friends who start using they pronouns, and it takes me a minute to get used to it, even though I know a lot of other people that use they pronouns. And so it's okay to practice. I think we actually use singular they all the time. We just don't think about it, right? So if I'm like walking down the street and I say, oh, someone lost their dog, I hope they find it, right? We already use singular they. I think it's just seeing it in a new context and a new format. And so, yeah, I think that singular they is completely grammatically correct. It takes some adjustment. It's the Merriam-Webster word of the year 2 years ago. And even if it wasn't, if it makes someone feel seen and heard and safe, we should do it anyway.
Thanks, Levi. There was a question in here. Sorry, let me scroll back.
You're good.
Levi, how would you define queer? What is it and what is it not?
Sure. Wow. That is a loaded question, person. That's really interesting that you ask it that way. So first of all, excuse me, queer is a term that some LGBTQ plus communities find really empowering, and some LGBTQ plus communities find extremely offensive. I found it to be regional, generational, sometimes racial. It really depends. So that word is a contested word within our communities. But I will say, for me, the way I define queer is anyone that does not identify as cisgender and heterosexual. And so to me, it's a combination of those things. So to me, gender can be queer, right? And sexuality can be queer. So if someone's sexuality who identifies themselves as queer, I can't speak to all people's identities. But generally it's someone who, just doesn't identify as some form of heterosexual, right? So someone you might call a lesbian might identify themselves as queer. So it's actually a pretty nuanced way of thinking about things, but I think high level, it's anyone that does not identify as heterosexual and or cisgender in some combination. Now, what it isn't, now that's a really interesting question. And that's not, I'm not going to go super into it in this talk, but there is some debate about whether folks involved in like kink and BDSM communities who identify as heterosexual and cisgender can still identify as queer because their sexual practices may not be normative. I can't really speak to that, but I know that it's something that people talk about. So I hope that helps. And that's not really what this presentation is about. So I'm not going to talk about it.
Thanks, Levi.
Yeah.
Okay, another one. My question is about bathrooms for non-binary kids. What would Levi recommend for a kid in a school where there are no unisex bathrooms? I have no idea what to advise my kid to do.
Yeah, that's an intense question. So I think I would, if the student wants to use a single stall restroom, I would talk to the school leader. And the reason I say that is because most schools do have some sort of single stall restroom, whether it's in the nurse's office or in or like a teacher's bathroom. And so I would ask, and I would say, my child needs to access this restroom and they need to use it. Non-binary folks are considered a protected class under Colorado state law. And so schools need to be in compliance. If you're a DPS parent, which I'm assuming most people on this call are, we did pass the all gender restroom mandate back in 2020. And so it says that all schools need to have an all gender restroom. And so you can ask what's happening in your school and ask for a report on that. COVID has stopped that process a little bit, but we are in the midst of implementing that. And if there are some DPS schools who don't have any single stall restrooms, and so in that case, right, if you've investigated all of their options, there's not a single stall anywhere in the building, we want kids to be able to use the restroom. We all know that holding our bowels can cause, health problems. And so I would talk to your young person and say, where do you feel the most comfortable? And I might work with a trusted adult in the building to say, look, this solution is inequitable and you need to do something about it. But for now, my child is going to use this bathroom and these are the safety measures they need to be able to use that restroom. So whether it means they get out of class 5 minutes early, 2 times a day, or however many times a day they need. Another thing I would do, because I think this can be really harmful to young people to have to choose. I don't think I know. So something that I've seen parents do when a child is going into a space that feels really unfriendly and harmful is to have like an opening, kind of like an opening ritual for the day. So when you and your child are getting ready to leave the house, whatever that ritual might look like, we're going to school today. I want you to use the bathroom because your kidneys need to function for the rest of your life. We're going to put on our heart shield, right? And so there's like a visualization, right? And then when your kiddo comes home, we're taking off our heart shield now and just kind of breathing them through that moment. That's not a perfect solution. But sometimes, again, our world is not made for non-binary people yet. And so I think it's really, really important to make sure that your kiddo is using the bathroom and to follow up with your admin, but also think about how are you supporting and protecting your child while you're moving through that process.
Thank you, Levi.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, what children's literature do you know about or recommend that discuss transgender and non-binary people? I know of about 3 titles, Introducing Teddy, Our Rainbow, Julian is a Mermaid, but want to expand my book list to include much more. I'm looking for book recommendations for children 0 to 6.
Sure. So there are some great book recommendations. So again, if you Google DPS Sora LGBTQ, which is Sora is SORA, they have amazing book lists. Another place that I would look is this website called welcomingschools.org. So they have book lists, they have lesson plans, they have SEL lesson plans, all sorts of incredible materials that are sorted by age, but they're mostly for elementary school. And so that's where I would look.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We might have time for about 1 or 2 more.
Okay.
Oh, or actually, no. Okay, I guess we do have a little bit more time. Okay. What about history of transgender and queerness? Is the global societal conversation about LGBTQ plus new? Is this language finally catching up to reality? Is that part of why we are in a rut of, is that part of why we are in a rut of seeing only male, female?
Wow, that's a really big question for me to answer. I think that the global, conversations about gender, I actually personally feel the United States is really behind. I think that, I think that history works in a cycle or like a wave. And so I can't really speak to everybody's global experience, but I will say, I think that some things cycle in and some things cycle out. I think if you look at like Germany, pre-World War II Germany, there's a lot of conversations, research, literature, and life, especially of transgender and non-binary people. I think that the way that transgender and queer history is recorded or not recorded, it's really difficult to track. And there are some great reads. Susan Stryker is great, Transgender History, which was in the resource list. The book I was talking about, Histories of the Transgender Child. There's also a great book called The Biopolitics of Feeling that's also very dense. But I think that, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I think that there's a cyclicalness to it. There are conversations about it, then there aren't, then they're stomped, then they come back. They happen in pockets. And so I think that,
someone did put in the chat, which I don't think everyone can see, but they put globalqueerheritage.com.
Oh, thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah, so I don't know that everyone can see that. Okay, another question. Recently, conversations that I have been a part of about transgender people eventually lead to a discussion about whether and when drugs and surgery are appropriate. I don't know how I feel about it, and there's something about the conversation that makes me uncomfortable. Could you comment? I am cis, having conversations with other cis people.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really deep question. I think that other people's bodies and choices are none of our business. I don't think we need to worry about the bodies and choices of other people, right? We're having a lot of conversations in our country right now about bodily autonomy in many ways, and this is another one of those ways. And I think for you as a cis ally, I think I don't know the context of how you know these people, but if it feels appropriate to say, I think this is really, this makes me feel really uncomfortable. I'm not sure that we have the right to talk about this and see where it goes. There's a great video by, I wish I could remember what it's called. It's an activist named Janet Mock. She wrote Redefining Realness, and she did this YouTube video where she switched roles with a cisgender interviewer who was interviewing her, and she asked the questions the interviewer was going to ask. And, I think when you turn the lens on cis people, you can understand how uncomfortable it feels to be asking invasive questions about other people's bodies, right? So I was talking to this person who also does LGBTQ PD last year sometime, and he said, I think I'm going to start all of my trans 101s by having you turn to your shoulder partner and describe your genitals. I can't see y'all, but I can imagine what your faces look like right now. Other people's bodies are none of our business. And so I think if you feel comfortable to stand in and say why it makes you uncomfortable, go for it. If having one-on-one conversations feels better to you, go for it. And I think that, a trans person is a trans person. It doesn't matter if folks have surgery. It doesn't matter if folks take hormones. A lot of people don't for a variety of reasons. And it's really none of our business. Like, to be very vulnerable with y'all, I identified as trans masculine starting when I was 28. And then I had top surgery when I was 33, right? So for 5 years, I had giant breasts, right? And people were confused by that, but that's really nobody's business, right? And that kind of reminds me of that poem, telling secrets that you owe no one, right? So I think that just remembering that everyone has a private body and they're really nobody's business, and just reminding folks of that,
Awesome. Thank you, Levi. This one just it looks like it's a suggestion for adding to actions, normalize using pronouns, things like email signatures. I'd love to see DPS senior administrators have all their pronouns in their newsletter/emails. There's another question here. I appreciate what you said about everyone's journey being unique and nuanced. I struggle with some of my child's expression being very cliche with everything he sees on TikTok and YouTube. I would like to support my child's unique and nuanced journey. How can I best encourage him to find his own way beyond what he identifies with on social media?
Well, I don't know your kid very well or at all. And so I can't really say like what your kiddo is experiencing. But I will say that I think that what folks see in media influences them, and that's not necessarily a negative or a bad thing, right? We take things, we try them on. Sometimes they fit and sometimes they don't. And I think that for me, at least as someone in my 40s, right, I don't even know what TikTok is. I don't understand how it works. But I think about my own development and the ways in which I took on parts of my identity and the ways in which the world around me influenced it. And I don't think that made me anyway. I think it helped me find myself. And so I think having conversations with your kiddo about what they're seeing and how they're connecting to it could be really positive. And I also think, and I don't know how your kid identifies, but something I do notice particularly among trans boys, is as they go through their journey, sometimes they take on kind of toxic masculinity or hyper masculine traits in order to, feel male. I'm putting that in air quotes because I'm not going to define that for other people. And I think something that is really important, especially if you have someone in exploring masculinity, is to talk with them about the kind of masculine person they want to be. Because a lot of traits of masculinity in our culture are toxic and harmful to people who identify as women and girls. And I think it's really important to have those conversations. So that's what I think about that.
Thanks, Levi. Any tips for, sorry, I'm going to say, we're going to do about 5 more minutes of questions. Okay. Any tips for creating a GSA or ally club at an elementary level? Any resources would be greatly appreciated.
Sure. So there are a lot of elementary school GSAs here in DPS. There's a great guide called Get It Started, and I can link it into the slides, or I can send it to you all to send out, Megan. And so it's just called the Get It Started guide, and it just talks about how to start a GSA. At the elementary school level, I think it's really important to inquire with students about what they want. And so if you have students that are coming to you and talking to you and asking to start one, turn that into a leadership opportunity and say, yeah, we want to start this club. What do you think it should be about? Do you think it should be about LGBTQ plus inclusion? Do you want to talk about diversity in general? And kind of get those kids going in a leadership role, and then kind of just see where it goes. Some of our GSAs are very activist oriented. Some of them watch anime. Some of them just like to sit and talk. And so really establishing what the club is and what students want it to be. You do not have to ask for parent permission for a student to attend a GSA. If you don't require parent permission for other clubs in your school, you don't need to require one for clubs for this particular club. I can also, if you're a person who works in DPS, I can connect you with some folks who have really powerful GSAs in elementary school.
Awesome. Thanks, Levi. Okay, this question, there's two questions that maybe you could address together. So one is, how would you recommend you approach conversations with parents who do not support their child, who their child is? I've had parents say, I don't call my child by that name. Please don't use it when you talk to me about them. And then there's another one that says, I'm a school nurse. What advice would you give me for talking with parents who do not accept their child's transgender identity?
Oh, those are really big
I
questions.
know.
So here in DPS, our policy is that we support in schools. So if you are a DPS employee on this call, we encourage and support and affirm the identities of our transgender and non-binary students, regardless of what is going on at home. Sometimes school is the literal only place that a child can feel safe in their gender identity, and we're going to encourage that. When I say that in trainings, people say, well, you want me to not tell the parents the truth? No, but what I am saying is that we're going to follow our policies, and people, it's a scary time right now to be a teacher, right? There's a lot of hot topics going on. But here in DPS, this is the policy we follow because we know it's what keeps kids alive. It's what keeps them in school. It's what keeps them from harming themselves, from abusing drugs. And so I would encourage you as the nurse to keep using that name. What I would do, what I always recommend is that you talk to the kiddo and say, hey, I want to know what's going on for you at home. Like when I call home or when I talk to your parents, what name do you want me to use and what pronoun do you want me to use? And then I would follow the lead of the child, because for some children, they don't actually want you to use the name that they choose or their true name. I don't like to say preferred name. For whatever reason, because they're not out at home, they're not safe at home. And so I would talk to the kiddo about it. There's a great resource called the Gender Support Plan, which is on a website called Gender Spectrum. And they have what's called a gender support plan. And so it's kind of like a form you fill out with a child, with a trusted adult. It's a confidential form, and it supports the kiddo to kind of talk through these situations. For the first person asking the question, I don't know the context of your relationship with this adult. So, I think it depends. Like if you're friends with the adult, with the parent, I would try just having conversations with them. And I don't know the entry point. Some people really need to hear data. Some people really need to hear stories. And so for you as an adult that knows that adult, find a way to talk to them in a way that works for you. If you're a teacher here in DPS, this is our policy in DPS. This is what we do, and I think sometimes there's some fear around that. And I had a situation like this last year where a student wanted to be called one name, parents wanted the kid called another name. And it was kind of, it was a thing that we went through with the school. And I was speaking to somebody on our legal team, and they said, listen, I wouldn't worry about a parent suing you. What I would worry about is if something happens to this child and we aren't following our own policy, and something happens as a result of us not following our own policy. So I'm not sure what the context of the question is, but I think as a parent ally, you have a lot of power to talk with other adults in your life about what's happening.
Thanks, Levi. I'm going to do one more, and I see there's a lot of questions we didn't get to. So Levi, if you're okay, no, it's okay. If you're okay with us, we'll capture the questions. And then if we give you some time, could you maybe answer those that we could provide in a follow-up?
Yeah, like a FAQ or something?
Yeah, just
sure.
because we can't get to all of them. But there was another one here. What are your recommendations about locker rooms and changing clothes? At my child's school, they are offered to change in a cleaning closet instead. Can I push against that?
Yes, and I would. So in DPS, transgender children are, and under Colorado state law, transgender children can access the restrooms and the locker rooms of the gender they consistently identify with at school. Anyone who is uncomfortable can request a reasonable accommodation. And so cleaning closet doesn't sound like a reasonable accommodation to me. Transgender and gender non-binary children are considered protected classes in our state, and they have a right to equitable access to spaces. That's what I would say about that.
Thank you, Levi. We've also just got a lot of people in the Q&A just saying thank you for the
Oh, you're welcome.
presentation. This was wonderful. We're gonna drop in the chat here a Google form so that we can get your feedback from this. So we would love everyone's feedback. And then we'll take the questions that we didn't get to, Levi, and we'll share them with you.
Okay.
And maybe you can answer those, because again, there were some really great
Sure.
questions. Definitely want to try to get those answered. So
Sure. And I definitely want to, just as we're wrapping up, just want to encourage folks to look at the DPS LGBTQ+ toolkit, which is on our Safe and Welcoming Schools page. It has a lot of resources in it. It has everything about DPS policy in it. Please email me. On the screen here is my email. If you have any questions, follow-up questions, things that come to you while you're taking a shower. And we're going to send out this presentation along with the links. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And I see a lot of parent allies on this call that I know. So thanks for being here, y'all.
yeah.
And thanks to everybody else. It's just nice because, you never know what's going to happen and it can be scary.
Thank you. Yeah, our next session is going to be, we usually do the first Wednesday of the month, so December 1st. It'll be Judy's house talking about grief and loss. So we'll make sure we send information out about that, but we thank you all. We'll hang on for a minute. Like I said, if you could provide feedback, that would be great. And thank you all again. Oh, I love it. A DPS principal was on here. Yay. Awesome.